Good afternoon. Welcome into the Senate Committee on Government Operations meeting for Friday, April 11th of 2025. We're going to take further testimony on the House Bill 474, miscellaneous changes to election law. And let me, and you both have presentations, by the way, online from our two witnesses today, Robert Johnson, who is from the city of Burlington. If you'd like to close that door and let me through.
I did not get a link for Zoom, so I can't present on there.
I'll send it right now.
Okay, I didn't even see you were there. You were hiding behind there. I did not see that you were there.
So let's do introductions first. Senator Wright.
Senator Hart, Orange County.
Senator Allison Clarkson representing the Windsor District. I'm Brian Fowler representing the Rutland District.
Jillian, Committee Assistant.
Tony Bielski, Chittenden Central District.
And Senator Rebecca White, also representing the Windsor District, will be joining us momentarily. So welcome in, Robert.
Yep, my name is Robert Brister Johnson. I live in Burlington. I'm in Senator Vohovsky's district. I'm also in Bob Hooper and Carol Odie's House district,
Okay.
which is next door to Abby Duke's district. And I haven't yet gotten the email.
Well, again, we have a written presentation that you sent us, the presentation.
I just sent the PDF of the
So we can follow on the website.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it right here.
So you may not need to share anything.
All right, so then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna still bring it up so that I know what I'm talking about. I want to talk about parties and candidates and primaries.
Okay.
And originally, I only wanted to speak on the portion of the bill that is called the one bite candidacy portion. But I would like to say a few words about ranked choice voting in response to some of the things that were said on Wednesday about it. So about ranked choice voting. I am a published author regarding that in Constitutional Political Economy. It's a Springer journal. And it is the paper I wrote was about Burlington's 2009 experience. It turns out that that's a kind of an infamous election regarding instant runoff voting. That
I remember
it had a hiccup that was not repeated often, but it was repeated in Alaska in August of 2022. So in the next page on my, there are three different categories of elections that you should know about. And it's because we're trying to accomplish different things that even if you have the right ballot for that election, the way that you want to resolve the election to literally tally the votes is different because you're trying to accomplish different things. So one is single winner elections. When you have a single winner, there's no proportionality to be had. And so then the only way to count our votes equally is to have majority rule. Because if you don't have majority rule and a minority candidate somehow wins, those fewer voters that voted for that minority candidate, but their candidate won, somehow their votes counted more than the votes for the greater number of people who voted for a different candidate that lost. And specifically in Burlington in 2009, 4,064 voters marked their ballots that Democrat Andy Montrell was a better choice than Bob Kiss. 3,476 voters marked their ballot that Bob Kiss was a better choice. Yet Bob Kiss was elected. In Alaska in October 2022, these are round numbers, 87,000 Alaskans marked their ballot that Nick Begich was a better choice than Mary Peltola. 79,000 Alaskans marked their ballots that Mary Peltola was a better choice. Yet Mary Peltola went to Washington. Nick Begich led over her by a margin of 8,000 votes. That was repeated in 2004 by a margin of 7,800 votes. Nick Begich was preferred over Mary Peltola, but this time Nick Begich goes to Washington. What was different? And the difference is Sarah Palin was a candidate in 2022. Sarah Palin was a swore. So that's single winner elections. There's a solution to that, but it's. I don't want to get into it because I want to talk about other stuff. There are multi-winner elections. So you would expect in a district that say had three elected members in the district, and if it was say 60% Republican and 30% Democrat, you might expect that two of those three members would be Republican and one of the three would be Democrat. You wouldn't want to have a shutout where all three members were Republican because they were able to squeak a majority on all three seats. That would not necessarily be representing our votes equally. And there is a method for that. It's a different method. It's called STV, and there's a specific STV called Weighted Inclusive Gregory Method, which is what you should consider if we're going to use ranked choice voting for multi-winner elections. Then the third kind of election, totally different, is the presidential primary. There, we are trying to apportion delegates to for proportionality, we're trying to apportion delegates to the national convention in proportion to the number of votes that they get. That turns out to be, their voters are not voting for specific delegates, though. They're voting for the candidates. But then based on the vote totals that each candidate gets, you apportion the delegates. That is exactly the same mathematical problem that we deal with every 10 years with the census and apportioning seats to the House of Representatives in the US Congress. When we know that we have 435 seats and we know what the populations of each state is, there's a mathematical solution. It's called the Huntington Hill method. And that is what we should use for the presidential primary in apportioning delegates. That's all I want to say about ranked choice voting, because I could talk for hours about it, but I came here to speak about something else. So this is going to be about this one by candidacy portion of the bill.
Okay.
So it's about parties. We know that the founding fathers were not fond of parties or factions. They wrote a lot about it, but they viewed parties as inevitable. And the reason why they are inevitable is simply the First Amendment. The First Amendment gives us freedom of speech, gives us freedom of associations, called freedom of assembly. But because we have freedom of speech and we have freedom of association, then we're going to have parties. Can't help that. It's actually probably good. Parties is when like-minded people get together and they coalesce, they make a coalition, and they vote together in order to accomplish something, to get somebody elected, or in the chamber to get something passed. So I can think of three different categories of private organizations: corporations, trade unions, and political parties. They're all private, but somehow the government is still involved and should be. The reason why is these are very large private organizations, and we don't want a faction within that organization from robbing the rest of another faction or the rest of the organization. So it's appropriate that government does get involved in political parties, which are private organizations. And the way that government has a role in private organizations is that we have primaries. The government administers primaries. Why do we have primaries? We have primaries so that for the reason of democracy, I remember Senator Vohosky brought this up when some witness used it, it's because of democracy.
That could be on many topics.
That was Wednesday, and I just want we want the voters to decide who their leaders are, who their candidates are, not the smoke-filled back room. That's the reason we want parties, and so that's what I'm here to speak about. So the next slide is the report from last fall's or August primary.
Yeah.
And you'll see that there was about 52,000 Democrats that voted. There were about 25,000 Republicans that voted and 414 progressives. We were all handed 3 ballots. So they printed up something like 80,000 ballots, and all of them except for 414 went to the dumpster. Went into
The recycle bin.
in the recycle bin. Yes. Okay. And it's not, I'm willing to kill a few trees for the sake of democracy, and that's not the problem. The problem is that this party primary specifically is ineffective. It is, I don't want to call it a joke, but it's not for real. They're progressive. I mean, there are 414 progressives in the whole state. There are more than 414 progressives in the old north end of Burlington. If you were to toss in wards 1, 2, and 3 and Winooski itself, you're going to get a couple thousand, minimum of a couple thousand progressives. There are probably at least 10,000 progressives in the state. Yet they're not voting in their own primary.
Right.
And that's a problem. Now, statewide, I wouldn't say that dilution I mean, I think we know which party they're voting in, which party primary they're voting. Statewide, I wouldn't say that dilution of the Democratic voters is happening because there's not that many progressives, that there's not a lot of dilution in a statewide office. But there are some districts, and specifically, I want to bring up Chittenden 17. Now, that's not my district. I live north of that. I'm in Bob Hooper and Carol Oge's district. This is the district that Abby Duke is the representative of, and prior to her is current mayor Emma Mulvaney Stanek was, and prior to her was Gene O'Sullivan. And that just because the geography of Burlington and the fact that we have to have 4,000 population per representative in each district to make it equally. So the 8,000 population in the Chittenden 18, which is where I live, that brings the boundary down to about where the Ethan Allen Shopping Center, the Hannaford's, so the Chittenden 18 comes down that far, but there's still some New North End left. And so the Village Green neighborhood, this is where Bernie and Jane lives, and it's also where, but anyway, that part of the New North End is not enough for even a single member district. And so that district, when we redistrict, it has no choice. It must straddle the old North End of Burlington, which is the dominion of the Progressive Party, and the new North End of Burlington. So it's going to be a slugfest. Every 2 years, we're going to have a slugfest. That's okay. This is democracy. But when the primary happens, the progressives do not vote in the primary, hardly at all. Only maybe a dozen. And then there's some dilution of the vote that does affect it. And that actually got Emma Mulvaney Stanek elected to office in 2020. She defeated an incumbent Democrat in the primary. None of the progressives voted in the progressive primary. They only voted in crossovers. Some of us consider that to be a problem. So the other problem was in this last election, in the statewide race. This is the lieutenant governor race. On the progressive primary, there was a name, and it was Zoriah Hightower, who I believe was the treasurer for the David Zuckerman campaign. She was the person listed, and she went public, and she said, "I'm just a placeholder candidate." And the reason why they had her there is because, I will not mention this person's name, but there is a fringe candidate in the Progressive Party that they don't want to actually win on a statewide office, because then that would be the progressive. They would have to put her on the general election ballot. So Zoriah Hightower runs insincerely, then she withdraws, and then the executive committee of the Progressive Party, 4 people choose who it is that goes on to the general election ballot. It's not just the progressive ballot, it's the general election. That's a problem. So I have 5 suggestions. This will be the end of my thing if you're there. Suggestion 1, party affiliated candidates or independent candidates or fusion candidates must not be officially advantaged or disadvantaged by the state. We have to be very careful not to help or hinder any of these candidates. 2, ballot access must be exactly the same, whether the candidate is affiliated with a party or not. If the candidate gets enough signatures on a petition, they're on the ballot. If they don't get enough signatures, they're not on the ballot. So then the issue about the name that goes by the candidate's name, it's really just an issue of the label on the general election ballot. If and only if that candidate runs in and wins a party primary, should they be allowed to put that party name on the general, by their name on the general. Is it too much to ask that if you're going to run as a Democrat, you put Democrat by your name on the ballot, that you run in and win the Democratic primary? Is it too much to ask that of a Republican candidate? If you put Republican by your name on the general election ballot, you should run in and win the Republican primary. Is that too much to ask? 4, a party executive committee should be able to name a replacement candidate only if the party nominated candidate dies or is medically incapacitated, we must not allow candidate withdrawal to be sufficient to pull that candidate out and then replace them simply from the party executive committee on the ballot. But that's what happened. It's happened on the, statewide through the lieutenant governor race, Okay. 5, this is difficult. This is so 4 was the stick, 5 is the carrot. Individual candidates should be allowed to run in multiple party primaries for the same office simultaneously. This is the legitimate manner in which a fusion candidate can credibly place multiple party names by their name on the general election ballot. But that will mean changing the law because of course it's prohibited now. But that's the only way if we're going to force candidates to win the party nomination. We also must allow them to run in that party primary. So what we shouldn't do is what New York State does. I lived in New Jersey, but I remember the George Pataki run in 1996, I think it was, or something like that. And his name appeared 2 different places on the general election ballot. He appeared as a Republican on the Republican line, and he appeared as a conservative on the conservative line. There's nothing wrong with him running as a conservative and getting the approval of the Conservative Party and saying he's a conservative. He's the choice of the conservatives and the Republicans. But he got twice as much real estate on the ballot than any other candidate on the general election ballot. That's not fair. And so if we have fusion candidates, and we should have fusion candidates, 2 parties is better than 1. We don't want to have a single party state. 2 parties is better than 1, but 3 parties is better than 2. And 4 parties made even better. They don't all have to be major parties, but they should all be able to run on a level playing field. But a level playing field is not somebody getting to put their name twice on the ballot. That's not fair. And that's what they did in New York State. And that's not fair. We should not do that. That is the end of it.
I don't think we should.
Well, we don't do that here. But the thing is what we do is prohibit candidates from running simultaneously in multiple party primaries. That's what should change. And what we do is allow executive committees to choose a party nominee when the nominated candidate simply voluntarily withdraws. We should not do that.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
And Robert, you sent that to our.
Yeah, it's already on our website.
And I would have presented it there, but I didn't get the arrangement enough because I did see you.
Yes.
Our other witness is Sharon Tolbert, who is the treasurer of the Vermont Right to Life Political Committee. This also is on the website. And welcome in.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Joanne.
You said my name is Sharon Toborg. I am the treasurer of Vermont Right to Life and its political committees. I've also been the treasurer for a number of other political committees, including the Vermonters for Good Government Public Question Campaign Committee. And I also provided testimony in Randall versus Scott, the Supreme Court case that originated out of Vermont concerning Vermont's campaign finance laws, and as well as the Vermont Right to Life Fund for Independent Expenditures v. Sorrell, which overturned Vermont's contribution limits to PACs that only do independent expenditure only. I'm here today not necessarily representing any organization, but as someone who's been a PAC treasurer for 30 years in Vermont, I rely on Vermont's campaign finance laws to be clear and understandable so that I know how to file reports when it's time. And I'm very concerned that there are some provisions in H474 that really muddy those waters and will cause a lot of confusion and, quite frankly, make absolutely no sense. I'd start with the elimination of the standalone definition of an independent expenditure only political committee and how that's been combined with this public question campaign, a new definition that has been in place. Now, those two things are really apples and oranges. They are very distinct concepts in campaign finance, and I don't understand how putting them together in one definition makes any sense at all. I know in Wednesday's testimony, Representative Shea Waters Evans indicated that somehow doing that would require disclosure of treasurers' names in some way, but that's simply incorrect. It would have no bearing on that. Now, a public question, something like a school budget, a vote on a school budget, a charter change, a constitutional amendment is very different than an independent expenditure, which is the advocacy of the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. Now, those are very different things. I don't understand why they're combined into one definition and how that makes any sense, how it improves the law, how it makes things more clear.
Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Culver. And I appreciate you bringing this up because I had a similar question around not necessarily an opinion on that piece, but like, what does this mean? Like, what does the change actually do? And I'm happy to share with the committee because the legislative counselor, Tim Devlin, who I asked the question to, wrote up a fantastic brief kind of explaining it. So if it's all right, and it might not address your concern, but it helped me because I was like, what is this? What are we doing? It at least explains what the language is doing a little better. So if
That would be helpful.
yeah,
That would be very helpful.
because
But another concerning aspect of the definition, however, is it doesn't recognize that there are political committees that make independent expenditures, but they are not independent expenditure only committees. So that is not specified in the definition. So you're bringing in political committees under this definition that I don't think you may recognize that you're bringing in.
Senator Nagowski.
I wanted to ask Senator White if that brief was on our committee page or if you could share it with us.
dude, Jillian just got it.
You're so good.
So, yeah, it's also what the federal definition versus the state definition is strange too, but that was a whole nother layer to it.
Yeah. Yes, that's, yeah. And if you want some information about why perhaps the state definition is different, I'd be happy to share that, but I know time is short. So as I noted in my written testimony, I would urge this committee to keep a standalone definition of an independent expenditure only political committee, because that is sort of the salient point. That is what determines whether or not a political committee is subject to contribution limits in the state of Vermont. It is only an independent expenditure, only political committee that is not subject to those contributions limits. And I also think it would be helpful to include that explicitly in the statute. At the time that definition was created, there was still litigation going on concerning whether the contribution limits to an independent expenditure only political committee would be upheld constitutionally. So when they passed that definition, in the section on the effective date, they said, oh, this only takes effect for independent expenditure only PACs if this court says it's constitutional. And of course, the court never said that, but it was never actually explicitly put into statute. So that's there. I also have some concerns about the new changes to the definition of political committee. It used to require that a committee both raise and spend $1,000, and that has been changed to raise or spend $1,000. But what that change would do would bring every person who contributes $1,000 or more to candidates under the definition of a PAC. So if you have somebody who writes out a check, makes a donation to your campaign, that's an expenditure under Vermont law. And that would qualify them as a political committee under this new definition. And I happened to take a look, there were 1,700 donations of $1,000 or more made in the 24 election cycle. That's a lot of people and a lot more reports, and I don't think that that's what this committee intended to do, or that was an intent of the bill. But again, I'm not sure what exactly they were trying to capture when they made that change. And certainly contributions to candidates are already reported by the candidate. So there's also a lot of redundancy there. We don't need the person making it and the person receiving it. Everybody reporting. And again, it may be just a question of keeping the and instead of replacing it with the or. And one other point that I'll make, this was an issue that came up in 2022 with the constitutional amendments that were proposed. There's a lot of confusion within the statute as to how political committees that take a position on a public question should report. At Vermont Right to Life and Vermonters for Good Government, we filed on the political committee reporting schedule and filed both disclosures on expenditures and donations. There were other organizations in the state who were involved in that only filed expenditure reports and did not file donation information. And I think that it was the intent of the legislature that information should be filed. But when I filed a campaign finance complaint, the response was, well, there's some confusion in the law. That's what happened. But I think that could be fairly easily remedied and I have a suggestion for that in my written documents. If we just make it clear that a single source that makes expenditures files their expenditures, but a political committee that is both raising and spending money needs to file on the political committee schedule with disclosure of both donors and expenditures. There's some more information in the report. I know it's short on time. If you have any.
That's very law because I have to do goals.
But you're a candidate.
Yeah.
And candidates have some different requirements than political committees that are dealing with public questions.
So I think you also have to file mass media reports if you do over $5,000 of a campaign spend. I think
that actually does not apply to a public question. The mass media definition refers to an electioneering communication, and that involves the promotion of a clearly identified candidate.
I think I don't know. I want to believe you. I think that may actually not be true, but I think it's if you do more than $5,000, you do.
If you spend more than $5,000 but a mass media communication requires that you are promoting a clearly identified candidate as opposed to a position on a public question.
That may be one thing I might be getting confused, but I do think if there's a lot of acronyms, there's like an IEOPC or whatever, which is like candidate specific committee. Mm-hmm. And then there's the issue-based committee. And I think in changing this definition, I think you already do have to do it, but the very least, I think the changing of the definition would include you now in the bill. That might be where I'm getting confused. It's a change in the bill and not something you're required to do. But based on your response, it sounds like you probably wouldn't want to have to do that. So you wouldn't want to file a mass media report if it was in the bill, I guess my question. Or if you would respond to how you feel about as a single issue group having to file mass media reports.
I want to know what the requirements are clearly, and,
And if I'm incorrect and
Yeah.
it's not, how do you feel about that?
yeah, you can put it in statute. There again, there would be some constitutional questions because there are different constitutional standards for requirements of disclosures for expenditures that involve promotion of candidates as opposed to promotion of ballot items.
Senator Mikulski.
I'm wondering, and this is, again, this is confusion that came up in our synthetic media bill. If we need to work with council to open up and think about the definition of what is an election. If you recall, when we brought that to the floor, it became apparent that it did not include these public question campaigns. And so I wonder if there's actually some deeper work to do here to really define what we mean when we say election. And it'd be great to get Tim in to talk about how we might do that, because I think this is becoming clear to me that this is kind of a bigger issue.
And we should at least clarify it.
Yes.
Sharon, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate you and Robert taking
And yeah.
time today.
Any more questions? Happy to answer, and I'd love to see the memo.
Yes, I emailed it to Jillian. It may
So it'll go up?
be on the website.
Yes.
Yeah, and it'll be under Tim, I assume. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So we're gonna move to H 397, activated miscellaneous amendments to the statutes governing all emergency management and flood response. We have three witnesses, well, three people on the agenda. I don't know if we have, everybody wants to talk or not. Josh Hanford is up first from the director, or he is the director of intergovernmental affairs with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Welcome in.
Yeah, thank you. Samantha's got the PowerPoint, so we can just do this together. So it's,
Is it already on our site?
it is.
Yeah.
So we can follow along in that.
Okay. And then I also sent a memo that, the PowerPoint is a little bit more high level general, but a lot of what's in the PowerPoint, comes from the memo that was just passed out. That really explains some of the, genesis for these, components of the flood bill related to financial, issues of municipalities that really come out of the last 2 years of flooding and responding with, a dedicated team that's been working with all the municipalities impacted by the floods, and then in coordination with the Vermont Bond Bank. The Vermont Bond Bank assists communities with accessing municipal bonds, and really is concerned about the financial health of municipalities' bottom line. And so that memo just provides you with some more detail, some graphs about a complicated sort of topic that's in this bill or was in the bill originally. Level debt service example is a chart on the back there that we'll talk about as we run through the slide real quick. Okay. So this is really a sort of good government additions to the flood bill, as I said, related to municipal finance as a result of flooding. Some of these asks are more likely to help rural communities because some of the larger municipalities already have many of these authorities through various charters over the years, but they really should be granted to everyone. Floods happen in small towns. Financial health of your municipal budget and the way to manage that should be allowed to other municipalities. These proposals really have been broadly socialized across many in the legislature and a lot of our partners out there. We started working on them all the way back the past summer. We've already testified in Senator Cropes, House and Senate GovOps, House and Senate Transportation, broadly about these needs here. And they're supported by obviously VLCT and all our members. They were voted on at our annual meeting by all our members, the Vermont Bond Bank, Clerks and Treasurers Association, the school business officials, government finance officials, and the unassigned fund balance issue has been commented on by numerous auditors when they're reviewing the municipal budgets and doing audits, that this is a best accounting practice. We'll get into what that is in a minute here. As I said, these provisions will improve emergency response for municipalities, create stabilizing factors for local property taxes, and improve grant readiness for towns and cities, especially as we approach increasingly volatile period of federal funding. A quick sort of summary is look back over the last couple of years. The type of flooding we've seen has impacted towns across the state, and some multiple times, like Linden, Moortown, Middlesex, Cavendish. You can see the list there. These aren't insignificant impacts on budgets, and it takes years and years to get your FEMA reimbursement. And so municipalities are having to deal with this on the short term with emergency borrowing and other shifting of funds. It's important to note that
Here, sorry, I thought we were really.
that memo is more detail once we get to the specific provisions. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
no problem.
looking here.
You know, it's important to note that there were, what are we trying to say here? That the entities impacted by the 24 floods, about 1/3 of them make up 90% of the damage. So a small section were very hardly hit. And they have severe sort of budget challenges right now. 2/3 were also hit in the 23 floods. And the majority of these municipalities were towns with populations less than 2,000.
So this,
Can I just,
Yeah.
can we, before further? And sadly, some of this money isn't coming through. And
Correct.
I was just about to say, these amounts are currently outstanding.
right, this is.
So this is debt that they took out that FEMA has not sent them the reimbursement for.
Right, and this is our
Yeah.
challenge that we're all.
They had got, I thought Bridgewater got.
Senator Yost?
Is there any concern that these FEMA reimbursements won't come?
Yeah,
Okay,
Sure.
That's the.
I assumed that might be the case, but it's
Yeah.
helpful to have it on the record.
which as we go forward in today's discussion, also keep in mind that for FEMA and most types of federal awards that municipalities receive for all types of, libraries, bridges, forestry projects. If the municipality does not maintain compliance with the grant requirements and reporting over time, that money could be clawed back. So even if the even if and when the FEMA reimbursements come through, the need for the ongoing, like, a grant is not something you apply for and you take the money and run. It establishes an ongoing compliance relationship to maintain those finances on the municipality side so that they're not at risk of owing the money back.
So can I ask, you may not be able to answer the question, but I'm certainly not a federal FEMA grants expert and you may not be either. But I guess my question is when you get that grant money and agree to that compliance, can those things be changed after the fact? So if I've agreed to,
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, and now the federal government says, actually, we're going to change and you have to do A, B, and
Yeah.
C, do I now have to be compliant with different things?
So depending on the program, and we're not, but our colleagues are.
Yeah, and I have something to add to that too.
Yeah.
One, the other question about could FEMA not, provide this funding from the flood right now because of the current political environment. It's also true that even after Irene, we were still closing out projects 10, 12 years. It was just
Yeah.
2 years ago that the last project. So
Correct.
even in the best of times, these projects take a lot of time to work out, and there's often disagreements about what FEMA will pay for, what they won't pay for. There's some special types of funding that you can do an alternative project because it doesn't make any sense to repair this one road that went nowhere. And so you could ask for a way to apply that to a different project. And so it gets real complicated to answer it with a blanket statement. But it's very true that sort of the initiatives and the goals and what you can use it for could change over time.
If I'll use like a hypothetical, so say a town gets a federal grant to put solar panels on their town hall. And they apply for the grant under the certain scope for the amount of money needed, and then they get the grant award, and then they encumber costs that are eligible under the terms of the grant. And then the contractor's like, whoa, you need to do all this like interior work before we
agree to wire these panels up, then a typical thing that could happen is the town could go to the funder and propose changes to the project, and those get approved or not. And that's sort of a normal process. And that does happen with FEMA, that back and forth. Often if a town wants to scale up, they don't want to replace the culvert that was there that got blown out. They want to design bigger and better for the future. And so there's often a back and forth of like, will FEMA reimburse the cost of the replacement of the old culvert, or will they reimburse the cost of the new, better engineered culvert for the future?
And we're having less of that now after Irene. That was a big battle in Irene.
Mhm.
I guess my question more, because I know that, you know, we have had a lot of conversation around climate mitigation and resiliency and building back better and stronger and more resiliently. I guess my concern is if something was approved in 2023 and we now have an administration that doesn't believe in doing that, can they retroactively say, actually, no, we're not gonna pick for that anymore?
Well, so there's a FEMA program called BRIC, BRIC, which has paid for a lot of these resiliency projects, not damage, but resiliency. And the federal government did announce that that program was ended. In that announcement, which is days old, they said if you've gotten the money for an approved project, you're good. They're not going to claw back for the projects they've already begun to fund, like send the checks.
That's good because they're clawing back other things.
But there are municipalities across America that got awards but hadn't received the funds under the BRIC FEMA program, and they're
Not going to.
not going to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of along what you were talking about here, that, you know, financing strategies to approach funding the flood resiliency must be paired with sort of the appropriate technical assistance for grants and management, municipal finances, to make things work, and with expanded municipal authorities to exercise these best practices for government finance. We think we can make projects work better, stretch the dollars, have more flexibility to respond to the crises that we already knew we had, but in the future, you know, there's a lot of grants out there that require a competitive match, a local match, and to have funding on hand to receive that is a challenge for communities. FEMA reimbursement is complex and time consuming. And through our municipal technical assistance funding right now that the LCT and other partners have, we've worked with every flood affected community across the state to help them look at how to finance their debt, go and borrow money, how to apply for grants, how to get the reimbursement that sometimes your part-time volunteer town treasurer needs some extra time and support with. We provided this one-on-one assistance for each towns, as well as had workshops and online trainings. Over 200 attendees have joined these flood-related trainings. So that gets us directly to what's in the bill related to this work.
Hold on,
Yeah.
I want to pause here. We came into the session with 3 asks related to municipal finance under Title 24. We're discussing them here today. One is unassigned fund balance. One is related to emergency borrowing. The third is related to debt terms of service. It's called level debt service.
Which is the chart on that
Yeah.
back of that sheet you have.
So
Which one against me?
unassigned fund balance is the one that's here.
And the second,
Yeah, I'll give you a brief session recap. House GovOps, your companions on the other chamber, added these 3 things in
To the flood bill.
to the flood bill. House Ways and Means took a drive-by, like literally one day, no testimony. They eliminated section 12, which is the level debt service. So we're going to right now explain to you why we would like your support on sections 10 and 11, which are in the bill, and why we'd also like your support to put back in the level debt service. And these 3 proposals are jointly requested by the LCT and the Vermont Bond Bank. And we have shopped them with our colleagues and clerks treasurers, Association of Governmental Finance Officials, and the school board and superintendents, and they would universally apply to those types of officials in Vermont, and they're all supported by that.
Senator Wayne?
I think you had two other asks that I've heard of the building that I just want to make sure, are you asking that of us or should I not worry about it? And that's, I believe the MTAP funding is going away,
Yes,
which is very concerning to me.
yeah,
We're lobbying for it hard in approach.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't need to,
That's
we
why-
don't need to worry about that.
yeah.
You still need to worry.
I definitely need to worry about it, but not, well, I'm wearing.
Stay worried. Yes,
Great.
we
okay.
are.
I think the quick history of that is it was in the governor's budget, House approach took it out.
Yeah, I
Like
don't
very
understand why.
at the,
Really quick, we didn't know what
That
we
is-
yeah,
thought.
again, like no testimony, we
Okay.
like, yeah.
And then the second one was local option tax.
Yep.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
a ton about that. I
You know,
don't,
we all of a sudden started.
I don't, you want, and I even mentioned the 80-20 thing when we were in committee last time.
Awesome.
You're not asking that within a.
We are,
Yeah.
and we'll get to
Ted
that.
Brady's email yesterday.
Yeah.
made it very
Okay.
clear that they want.
And there's a
Yeah.
large surplus that is sitting there.
Yes, but
Yeah.
there, but as far as I understand, this is viewed as a possibility for funding flood resiliency or resilient.
Well,
disaster
If,
resiliency.
if it's okay,
Collection of taxes, right,
so
so.
but could we have testimony prepared
Oh, yeah.
to discuss that?
Yeah.
So is it okay if we
Yep.
start here? Okay,
Yep.
great. So we'll start with what's in the bill and we like it. Number one, unassigned fund balances. So, I'm gonna leave this on the screen and I will explain an unassigned fund balance in layperson terms. So the voters of a town at the annual meeting of the town vote to approve the budget. The legislative body and municipal officials of that town go through their fiscal year under that budget as authorized. At the end of that budget year, there may be unexpended funds. Those unexpended funds could be reserved for specific needs such as capital streets or school tuition. My town has a school tuition reserve fund. They could be unreserved and they could be obligated or they could be unobligated. So they could be obligated to a project under the authorization of the voter, but the project's delayed and they haven't been spent. What does the legislative body of the town do with that money? Right now, unless authorized by charter, the town has to take that question to the voters at the annual town meeting. What we are asking for is the authority of the legislative body to move those funds forward. In the case of obligated and reserve funds, that's what they are. They're obligated or they're reserved, and that they'll be used for that in the future year budget. In the case of the unobligated types of funds that are just extra leftovers, they would be reserved in a balance that is sometimes called a rainy day fund. When you build up such a fund over time, the municipalities in Vermont that have that authority by charter, it's very useful for having grant matches available for emergency response, such as in COVID and after a flood. The cities that had them used those monies for those purposes. And it also helps the financial wellness of a municipality in a way that can significantly lower interest rates for municipal borrowing, thus saving taxpayers a lot of money. There's a sort of famous story of an unassigned fund balance in Vermont that you may have heard about at the time, which is the city of Burlington took action to restore its unassigned fund balance during the Citibank lawsuit over Burlington Telecom. In doing that, they now report, as of their most recent end of fiscal year report, which was 24, that has saved between 2012 and 2024 the taxpayers of Burlington over $40 million just in lowered interest rates. So this is a good conservative fiscal practice for government accounting that only some municipalities that are chartered have right now. We're asking for all municipalities to have it.
But annually, the voters would have to vote on it.
This would be a change
It would
to,
be a change, it would be the select board.
yeah,
And when I mentioned, auditors often cite this is, best government accounting practices is to have a sum assigned fund balance of 10-15% to be healthy, just like any business,
usually
just
more
like
like a 5%.
5 to 7, I forget the exact,
Yeah.
but you should have something on hand. In case there is a lot of rain and you need a rainy day fund. So that's the first one,
Any,
And that's still in the bill.
that's in the
still in the
bill.
bill.
Please keep it in the bill.
Okay.
Section 11, also still in the bill. This one's pretty straightforward. Currently, state law allows emergency borrowing, so a municipal body to take on debt in case of emergency for up to 1 year of repayment. We've learned through each of our states of emergency and all hazard events since Irene and 2023 and 2024. 1 year is not enough time to close out the FEMA reimbursements for many municipalities. So we're asking for that term that a municipality can borrow for repayment to go from 1 year to 5, or to the useful life of what's being financed for. So if it's a bridge and it's 30 years that bridge will live for, then they could spread that debt over 30 years. This would be only in all hazard events or states of emergency. So like an emergency is not, people keep complaining about the potholes on State Street. An emergency is an all hazards event as defined in the Green Book and the state of emergency as declared by the governor. Good?
Yep. And then the
Okay.
third one's the.
Yep, so this is the one that Ways and Means pulled out. What was discussed amongst the committee was that they were unclear on if this would impact TIF districts and the revenues of the state through the TIF program.
Yeah.
No testimony was heard. We did not get to respond to that concern, but I am prepared now to do that. So what level debt service, if you've ever financed a car, a student loan, a house, you have probably weighed these two options. One option is called principal debt service, where you pay the same amount of principal. And the interest rate starts, the amount of money you pay for your interest rate starts high and then goes down. The other type is called level principal, where both the interest and the principal payments are amortized over the life of the repayment period.
And that's the chart on the very back page showing
Yeah.
of the handout, what payment.
With my news.
I
You
don't know
can
why
see the
yours is
lines.
tiny.
Yeah, I mean,
Here's so this is big. So this is the only option now for municipalities. They can only do level principal. So see the dark blue at the bottom, that's what they pay for their principal is flat. And then the amount they pay for the interest starts big and goes down.
Yep.
What we're asking for is to keep that option and add this option, which makes the overall payment amount flat over the 30-year repayment period. I'll be candid, for towns like my town, we don't do a lot of ambitious borrowing and building of expensive things. This is not, they're like not gonna do this. Like they're gonna still do this. They're gonna spend the money while they have it, and then they're gonna wanna see the payment cost go down over time. For your district, these $100 million school bonds and these $200 million water bonds, this provides a lot of stability for taxpayers over the life of the debt. So you're not having these like wacky serialized bonding drawdowns. And this would really help them with their like municipal budget management over a period of time.
And how would municipality decide before you go with bond? Would the Board of Selectmen or the local legislative body be able to decide?
Yes, and these, all borrowing requires a vote of the town. So it has to go to question, and the law already requires that the terms of the debt service be communicated. And there's public hearings on it.
Yeah.
So if the select board chooses option B,
Mhm.
they explain that in the vote.
And the bond bank, really has brought this forward, that this is very common all across the country. When you're taking multiple bonds out to pay for something and you have payments that are going like this, it gets really confusing for voters. They don't have a standard sort of, they can look and think, oh, this is how much we're gonna pay. And then this is just an option, but the bond bank feels it would help with the decisions and make it easier for communities to borrow.
Yes.
Give them tools in their toolbox for good
Tools in the toolbox, but yeah.
And this is the one that was removed by,
This was removed by Ways and Means under the question, like, what would this do to TIF? And so if you would allow me, Mr. Chair, for the record, I can respond to that.
Yep.
Very little. So there's two reasons I'm gonna explain why this does not impact significantly the revenues of the state through TIF. One is that in the TIF districts, the debt capacity of the district is not determined by the terms of the loan in the way it is for other types of projects. The debt capacity of the TIF is determined through the BEPC approval process first, and then through the authority of the voter second. And then that's it. That's the ceiling, and that's what the municipality borrows. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that because these TIF districts, under the rules of the state, have a limited window where they can borrow and a limited window where they can expend. The reality is that these are the TIFs. Of the 11, 2 are closed, retired totally.
Mhm.
2 have a debt period that ends in 2026. It's Barry and
Hartford.
Hartford. Yep, there you go. And then Killington's debt period goes to 2023. But Killington's tax increment capacity is massive. The likelihood that in a difference in interest, if they chose to go with the amortized debt, would cause problems to the ed fund is not
It's not
serious.
Yeah, it's
Because they have such a massive, they're projected by BEPC and approved by BEPC a more than 2,000% increase in tax increment. Yeah, so their capacity is huge, and they would likely do a variety of borrowing, some like this and some like that.
Yep.
And the difference will be very small in terms of how that impacts the revenues of the state.
So the next chart we showed, I thought Rutland City just got a TIF too.
Rutland City has a TIF, and the debt period is closed. Did they get a new one?
Rutland got a new one, but they haven't initiated it yet.
Oh.
there's
No
been
debt.
no
But
activity.
it's been approved by
It's been
MEPC.
approved by BEPC, but they haven't started. But you're right.
Okay.
Yeah,
But this is nothing done for TIF. This is
Right.
municipal obligation bonds to sort of have a level payments that the taxpayers can understand
Gotcha.
Yeah.
and just follow best practices for this.
And I'll just say, we should not, I know that Ways and Means has strong feelings about TIFs, but a TIF district is the reason why our projection has improved over the last
So it
year.
all
So
worked out pretty well.
it's, so I just want to reflect on, I don't think we should be as negative about the concept of TIFs all the time. It's such an important, useful tool for housing,
Economic development.
sewer and wastewater. So we
This
just,
chamber just passed an important addition
Yes,
to our
you
TIF
did.
opportunities
Sure
and our chip. So we are all on board.
thank you.
We are working hard to get the
In case
other
Lori
body.
Hirschfeld is watching, I just
Yeah,
want
yeah. Oh, good. Yes, we're working hard to get the House to agree with us, and we hope they will. I have every confidence they will
Yeah,
move on this, which doesn't mean they're expanding the number of TIFs this year. But it does mean we will create hopefully a project-based TIF opportunity
For housing.
for us.
Okay,
Oh, so the last,
Step in the right
Yep.
direction.
so now we move on to local option taxes. When do you start?
so you're aware of our request. We talked to you earlier about that, the local option tax. Many more communities are adopting them. We just had 4 or 5 this last town meeting day. Since last year, you didn't have to have a charter, which half the towns don't have.
Right.
With the increase in short-term rentals and online sales, it's becoming an increasingly important tool for municipalities to raise their own revenue, to address their own needs, knowing that there are budget challenges and there's always more things that need to be done than perhaps appropriations can come out of here, and they're helping themselves. So when communities adopt the local option tax, they obligate those funds for something. Some communities, it's dedicated to their downtown program. Some it's for capital projects. Some they've decided to reduce their profit. They've already said what they're using it for. And there's been a long history of how we got to this place with local option tax. And there's been a 60-40 split at one point, and now we're at this 70-30 split. There's also a per parcel fee of like $5.56. And that current 30% that's retained of the 1% local option tax by the state is what pays the pilot fund, the payment in lieu of taxes, which pays municipalities in lieu of property taxes for state buildings in their jurisdiction.
And to pause here, so your question earlier, Senator Clarkson, like, is there discussion about using the surplus for floods? There is in this
Well,
bill.
for natural disasters.
Oh, right. So there is in this bill, a proposal which was made by the governor, which we'll address on the next slide, that would support municipalities who have had a flood buyout on their grand list. However, discussions about what to do with the now almost $14 million surplus have not happened in the policy committees. And I want to repeat the point that Josh made from the third bullet, which is that the 34 communities that have an LOT that has generated this soon to be $14 million surplus being held in the reserve fund, in their charter, it says what to do with that money. So some municipalities spent it on building a rec center. Some municipalities spend it like Montpelier on Montpelier Alive for the activation of downtown and economic development program. Other municipalities use it for their street capital fund. And that is the only way that the select board or the city council can obligate the local option tax revenue is to the street capital fund. So it is the perspective of our members, these 34 municipalities, that there does not need to be a legislative debate about how best to spend that money, because a local process has already happened that has determined how to spend that local revenue in the town.
So what has happened is that in FY22, the local option tax, the 30% of the 1% that the state keeps, met the full 100% payment of pilot for the first time. Pilot wasn't receiving 100%. Towns were getting 80% of what pilot should pay them. Since FY22, it has. Now we've built up right now, it's about $10.3 million by the end of this fiscal year, about $14.5 million, and the surplus is built up. And the $1 million in the governor's budget for this flood buyout program from this surplus is in this bill. And it would cover the municipal loss of grand lists if they approve the buyouts for 5 years. It's only 1 million of the 14.5 million. So our members are advocating for a return of this surplus if they feel it's an over collection of taxes, because now we've built up this pilot reserve fund. And so the formula needs to be reduced, which this bill reduces it from 70-30 to 75-25, increases it, and return the surplus.
So Yeah.
Given what's happening at the federal level and the clear loss, short-sighted loss of federal support for recovery from natural disasters. I think this conversation may be shifting from returning it to local towns, or we might consider shifting it to actually funding a serious municipal recovery fund that would be shared and be able to be applied for by the towns that have contributed and or by other towns, by all towns. But I think to return it to the towns at this point, given where we are with the huge federal losses that we may be facing on resiliency, this may be a conversation we actually want to wait to have next year. I mean, or I just think this landscape is changing, and I'm just curious. I know Ted landed hard on this yesterday in the email that we got from him, but I also think that I'm very concerned about about why we don't fund a municipal resiliency fund.
And to that subject, we've talked about that this local option tax, especially since each year we predict 5 or 6 communities are going to add to it. Let's talk about the new surplus that's going to develop. Absolutely. Let's talk about developing how to fund flood recovery. But the existing surplus that's built up only in the past 2 years from the 34 towns that have been overpaid, they would think differently that the reserve fund and the rules written now, fine, they're going to keep contributing to that surplus in the future years. A community like Williston provides a huge portion of this surplus. Millions. They have not received any flood recovery funding even back to Irene. And they're saying we'll be part of that future revenue, but we've already obligated what our local option tax to be used for. And what has happened is the state has kept too much of our local option tax. Let us put it into the very things we designated, and then let's discuss future surpluses, how to do flood recovery, resiliency, whatever the priorities of the state, since more and more communities are going to be paying into local option tax.
That's fine, that's for the future, but if there's a flood this summer, we are in deep trouble. I'm just saying, I think this is money we actually have on hand right now. And I would not use it that we were overpaying. It was the formula we all agreed to, the 70-30. We now realize, given the surplus that's grown up, that we need to be reevaluating that. But I don't think we could be planning. I mean, it was all something that agreed to, we've all benefited from. The 70% has benefited every community that has. I just think that it will take us a long time to get to 14 million again, even with Williston.
Well,
and so if you have a flood this summer or this fall, or an ice disaster next winter, we won't have that 14 million, and we'll have so much less from the feds. So I'm just putting that on the table.
I really appreciate you talking that through. This is the most conversation we've had about what to do with the surplus. There has been no policy discussion or debate about the surplus.
So saving it for this committee.
Yeah. So this is great. So according to JFO's briefing, which I linked in my email to you, the surplus just from fiscal year 2024 was 3.3 million. It's likely to be 4 million at the end of this quarter of this fiscal year. So it will grow.
Not fast enough if we need it tomorrow. And I agree, it's going to grow, and it's going to grow fast. But one thing we might consider is holding this to get us through until it's grown to equal the amount we have right now.
So if I could,
it's something we should consider.
So here, if I could just kind of show you, so I've done loose math, which uses JFO's numbers about the current surplus and then an assumption, which I feel is a conservative assumption, which is at the top. If the state needed an FY26 12 million plus for pilot payments. If you took the current estimated surplus of 14.3 roughly, if you use the appropriation in this bill, which VLCT supports for the buyout.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to hold a 15% surplus back, you could still return 12 million to the LOTs. If you wanted to
Reach to the towns.
yes, you could return 12, to the LOT town. If you wanted to, also, I believe this is conservative, only address the surplus, which is already accounted for in closed out fiscal years, which would be up to 2024, fiscal year 2024. Right. That amount is 10.3 according to JFO and to Commissioner Gresham. You could take the projected end of year FY26, or sorry, end of FY25. So in your big bill for 26, 14.3 minus the 1 million in this bill, return the full end of fiscal year surplus of 10.3, and you would still have a 25% surplus in the pilot fund. And that's before the revenues for 2026 are raised, which includes at least 500,000 in new towns revenues that have just passed their LOT as of town meeting day.
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you, and I appreciate you presenting the two proposed options. Obviously, we have all the options we want in the entire world,
right.
But if you're trying to resolve the question that I think has already been previously asked of you is, if we have money on hand, why aren't we holding on to it to potentially respond to a flood? Personally, I kind of agree with the idea that we should give as much money as possible out of this to the towns. I actually think it was a bad bargain that the towns were dealt originally. I think if you are raising a tax that you vote on independently, that you are going out there and building a constituency and a base for, you should get 100% of the tax.
You shouldn't, because the tax has to administer it. So
right, an administrative fee of 3%. They're already.
I agree. They overestimated that.
And I think that this is a fairness for towns who are struggling deeply. And I hope that we don't choose the priority program of, even though I'm a big flooding person, it could be housing next year. Housing. So that's my point, is if we hold it back for flooding in future years, we might have other priorities that are just as pressing. So I am very supportive of us moving forward with an 80-20 split and using,
This is based on 75-25 though, correct?
This is based off the 14.3. Okay, great question, Mr. Chair. I'll address it here. So at the end of 2024, closed out, the surplus is 10.3. According to JFO's brief, which you can interrogate, I won't speak for them, it is likely to approach an additional 4 million in 2025 under the current formula.
Okay.
Yep. I don't remember the exact figure. It's like 600,000 and change something over the 10.3 or the 3.3 from last year. Then I've added these new towns that will start in July. That's my math. Or VLCT had previously analyzed what new LOT revenue would be for all of our member towns. I confirmed which ones votes passed, which are these 4, and then I used those amounts. And that 530 is under the proposed ratio in this bill.
75-20.
And then I actually rounded it down by like $5,000. So that's like, and also our VLCT's math is based off of gross receipts from 2024. Those are going to go up. Everything goes up every year, like lately.
Well, unless we have a recession.
So,
And then, so So that's how I get to the 14.8.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
just how valuable this is, look at Brattleboro, right? They just voted on their budget. They have a huge, budget gap. They have calculated that their own municipal response to the homelessness crisis has added almost $600,000 to their budget.
Yes.
If they had a return of this, if they had a better formula, they'd be able to not have budget holes because they could use this money to address those very issues at the local level and rely less on advocating here for you to fill those holes for them as just it all is money that could be put to the various priorities that we all have. And sometimes the communities that have added these 1% to solve those very concerns is the most efficient way to deal with it.
Senator Bielanski.
Well, I think the most efficient way for us to deal with the homelessness crisis would be from the state level, but that's neither here nor there. My question is around the proposed change in the bill from 70-30 to 75-25. We heard from the sponsor and the chair of government operations that they landed on that in order to pay for some of the things within the bill. Is that number? Because I heard Senator White say 80-20. Is 75-25?
Great question. As far as I know, the only thing paid for from this pilot surplus in this bill that you're contemplating is the 1 million for flood buyout.
Yes, that's all I.
Okay.
Yeah. This conversation about future needs for future floods has not been happening
Right, we're happy.
around this bill.
Okay.
Or it has not been happening. What VLCT has advocated for is the surpluses be returned. That's the unanimous position of the municipal officials within the towns who have generated those funds. And if I could make I should have started here. This bill is incredibly important to VLCT. This carries the majority of our legislative priorities for this session. And at the top of the list is flood response and flood resiliency. The floods have dramatically hurt our members and the flood is still happening in towns across Vermont. We need this bill to pass and we support every provision in it.
Okay.
The question about should future LOT surpluses be used for future flood response is to us as an organization a totally different question, because why would the top 3 contributors to the special fund are Burlington, Colchester, and South Burlington?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me suggest, just for time's sake, we still have Eric to hear from.
And this was the end.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah,
Great.
we're done.
Thank you for the.
We're not gonna
Yeah.
make any decision, obviously, today.
Yeah.
We're gonna take some more
I'm
testimony.
fully in support. It would vote yes immediately.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just think it's a moment actually where we may have voted on something a few weeks ago and the landscape federally changing. And Eric knows how much we got from FEMA to help support our towns recover. And it's so huge. And I know that even 14 million would be inadequate, but I also know that it's a statewide need. I know you have towns that haven't yet been impacted, but they were impacted on different flooding occasions when Lake Champlain flooded. I think it's an opportunity for us to think more broadly about it. And yes, of course, I support our towns getting back a lot of what they spent. We spend it very well on economic development in our neck of the woods, but I know every town has its own choices. But I also know what Eric knows, which is how impacted we are by the reduction of federal spending on that recovering from natural disasters. And here's another opportunity that maybe we hadn't thought about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago when you took that vote.
So Josh and Samantha, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I had asked Eric to come back in. We did receive written testimony from him, which is still on our website. And I've asked him to be mindful of maybe a 10 or 15 minute presentation.
My goal is less than
And then we have Governor Anderson to wrap the day off.
Just one clarification. So yes, there is potential for FEMA reduction, but we're not necessarily seeing that on a disaster. So there's 2 different aspects of FEMA that perhaps the preparing and planning side, grants, thinking EMP
And resiliency.
and resilience. And then there's we had a disaster, there was things broken, payment funds. We're still seeing money coming in though.
But on the other side,
We're
which is what
seeing
this is
water.
addressing, it's resiliency.
And we're potentially seeing the BRIC funds, but the future NOFO, the no funding opportunity to get canceled.
Right.
There's
How much,
there's no clarity on what happened prior was worded, but hasn't been used yet. So
and how much is brick worth to the state?
it's about 2 million-ish a year. We use it for local hazard mitigation planning and scoping projects. So not a lot of clarity from FEMA. I wish I could provide some more. The only thing we know specifically is there won't be one next year.
Okay.
So thanks for letting me the opportunity to testify this afternoon. As I've mentioned, there's a few parts of H 397 that I feel need to be addressed before it moves on. Wanted to briefly detail them here for the ease of the review. You have my detailed written testimony should you have any questions. Trying to use my script so I stay on track for the minutes. The question came up on Tuesday about specificity. So I was detailing, making sure that you don't necessarily get too specific in some of the language. And I'll use an example of thou shalt talk to these 4 people when creating a state emergency management plan. Thou shalt do these 4 things when creating a local emergency management plan. To Tucker's point, some of those things go in there so the next director who might be more nefarious than me might use the lack of those as a way to do something else. But you also want to make sure that it's a slippery slope. A nefarious director could use that to only talk to those 4 people. So we look at the whole community. VEM looks at much bigger than those 4. We look at federal agencies, state agencies, non-governmental agencies, volunteer agencies. So our scope is much bigger than that. So there is the possibility that a nefarious person, hopefully we'll never hire a nefarious person, but even a benevolent director that comes in could look and say, oh, I only have to do those 4 things. Whereas if you use language about the whole community, they're going to incorporate more people in it. So as you use that language, just think about the potential for it to actually funnel down and allow that person to only do that specific thing. So not so vague that it's unusable, but you want to make sure that you give parameters to allow a much bigger scope. And from my seat, hopefully benevolent director, the idea is that we're always benevolent. We're always trying to encapsulate everyone. We want to make sure that we have the capacity to do that. So that being said, specifically, there's 3 sections that I want to talk about. Section 2.
Yeah, that's going to be great. It's pretty much the
So
section.
I'm going to try not to get specific because that's in the
Oh,
detail.
where was the section about benevolency?
No, it's page 2, section 2, and he's
Feel like that was
talking
a movie.
about the list where we have chief recovery office in consultation with planning commission.
Right, that's an example, but for example, if you look further on, it talks about having an emergency parking plan. That's a very specific thing to put in a local emergency management plan. If you look above that,
Right.
the language for local emergency management plan is be ready for all hazards, all planning, all everything. Know that you need to be able to respond to all of it. Once you start putting in thou shalt do emergency plans, well, the 75 other things that we have in local emergency management plans, now that's inadvertently not possible. So it's not necessarily something that we have to do. It's something that we do and will continue to do. But as you detail very specific things, you're inadvertently taking out the ambiguity to do more.
Senator Flex.
So my understanding from your testimony last time was that you'd like us to jettison number 4 on.
That was also in his written testimony.
Yeah, which I haven't printed that yet, so I have no idea what it was.
So I'm going to try to hit some high level stuff. The specificity is in the written. I know we're going to have a schedule. So for example, in written 2, section 2, I have some concerns that the items have been included in this section that have not been completely researched, and I believe they may need more time to be fleshed out. For example, in 7 after action reviews that we've done at the state level for the last 2 years worth of major disaster declarations, we've received no comments from local municipalities or local citizens or local jurisdictions about emergency parking plans.
I'm sorry, I didn't see Senator Opio raise his hand earlier.
Thank you. I was a little shy with it, I think. I fully appreciate what you're saying, and as everyone in the room knows, I hate lists. And I think there are points and times where we want to name, you have to do these things at the bare minimum and can definitely do more. And I wonder if it would make you feel more comfortable if we added another line here that something along the lines of all other required emergency planning as determined by VEM, to sort of highlight that we want these things, but yes, you can and should do other things.
Let's let her.
It's an option. I think it's the best of all evils, maybe. To me, a list, and I'm not a fan of specific lists because it keeps you very specific on what you can do. I think you look more like at the holistic value of the response that the state has had, the fact that we've been through multiple disasters, and obviously I have a jaded experience, but it's been fairly well, right? We've had very few deaths. We've had some destruction, but people are getting back on track. So we want to make sure that we're not what we call kind of jumping the gun and trying to solve problems in our problems. And that's what I'm talking about in section 2 is the specificity of like a parking plan or including those specific people, or talking about emergency notification systems that already exist, mentioning town level positions that don't exist. So in our world, what we do is we take an after action review means that we ask a bunch of questions of a bunch of people, then we evaluate it. We look at statistical anomalies. Did only one person talk about a parking plan, or did 50 people talk about a parking plan? So when we talk about our response, that's how we look at it. And Senator, the representative that came in and spoke about this specifically said that he just took everything and just put it all in here. And that's a great step one. But there's about 2 or 3 or 4 other steps that need to happen. And codifying it in state statute is step 5. So we're kind of jumping the chart.
I appreciate that. And one of the things I think that sometimes happens where it is important to say, do all the things and definitely do these things, is that we have communities that don't have a seat at the table and you don't know what you don't know. And so I think sometimes we do actually have to say, hey, actually, the Agency of Human Services, to really make sure we're having a focus on vulnerable population, should definitely be part of the plan, not limited to only that.
I 100% agree. My proposal is that it goes through the normal chain, the normal process. So you're right. Someone may not have had a seat at the table, so we should bring them to the table and then after action review and work through the normal process. Because what may happen is you may get basically a bell curve and you start to work it on the 2 ends, which isn't really where you want to be. You want to be in the middle where you're getting the most, for lack of a better word, bang for your buck. So even if you have these kind of group chats where people are talking, you want to make sure that you actually understand what they're talking about. And I made the example about the needs analysis. You're really getting to the root cause, right? What was the cause of this? And I keep using this parking plan. What was the cause of it? Did one person not know where to park their car? Did 50 cars get flooded? Is the town trying to understand what they can do in the future? There's a bunch of different things that could go into that. So codifying that a plan needs to go in there doesn't dig into what the actual ramifications of it are, because there are deeper ramifications, right? If the town doesn't own land on the hill, if you move to private property on the hill, what does that mean for insurances if they do get flooded or if they get vandalized?
I'd love to know the answer to those questions with multiple parking related emergency plans. That would be.
Maybe
You're
that's it.
asking such good questions. You already are
And I
developing
think
the plans, right?
what needs to be codified is the process for looking into emergency plans. If we don't want to necessarily go and just say, make plans right now, there's a bunch of steps that get us to that process. I'm running out of time.
Sorry.
Oh,
No.
I'm not allowed to call it.
Yes, Senator Flex.
So Eric, I would be interested in you developing language with Tucker that works for you and work for the process that you already oversee. And that is a really good process. I've been part of it. I was part of it. The recovery and reworking of the plan in Woodstock after Irene. We address vulnerable populations. We did all this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So I think that I would be very open to seeing you and Tucker are able to rework language that lets towns decide what's in their plan, that doesn't micromanage, and lets that work.
And that's a great part of what some of the issue here is. For example, the vulnerable populations in the CARE program, it already exists.
It already exists. I know that.
Or
So
local emergency management plans already exist. You're really getting down to the root cause of the town doesn't have the resources to use either one of those 2 things. And that's where, hopefully maybe the legislators get to step in and provide resources there. But a lot of my language, would be removing. And secondarily, I'll jump to section 7, which talks about
here, which is, I appreciate that it might be removing it all, but I think at least given your expertise and what you've already gone through and my experience on rewriting a plan and appreciating that most of this is addressed, I just appreciate an alternative instead of.
I like the language, frankly. I disagree. But
That's
that's
why we're
okay.
all here. That's fine.
Okay, section 7.
I'll go to section 7. Section 7 talks about another list of very specific things. It talks about weather prediction services under VDM. It talks about water alarm systems, very specific, very expensive, very non-cost effective responsibilities applied to VDM. Again, it talks about not necessarily going through the process of deciding what people actually need by talking to them. It kind of threw everything in a bucket and letting it fall where it may. So section 8 then goes back and says, why don't you do an assessment of all these things, tell us what you can or cannot do and how much it may or may not cost. And that's a great idea, but I think it's putting the cart before the horse. If you codify all of this in state statute in June, I have to do it.
Section 7.
And then if I get to
Page stuff.
December and I say it's going to cost $47 million and you don't give me the money creating weather prediction systems, it's not
Okay.
it costs a lot of money, or it costs a lot of personnel, or it costs a lot of whatever. And you don't, and I don't, there's no language in here that says, okay, then you don't have to do that.
Okay.
Right.
So
The
everybody,
language is there.
I'll just say upon the way I read section 7 is upon request of a municipal corporation. So that's a town. Upon the request of a town, what I believe it's asking you to do is to help them access. So you're not doing or buying anything. You're helping them access surface floodwater monitoring devices, which will automatically trigger notification systems for EMS providers and residents. So
But we don't have access to that. The state does not have contracts for that. The towns have the same access to those things that we do now. So telling us.
So what would you do now if a town came to you and said, hey, we would really like help with this? What would you tell them now?
They have, actually, we can't help in a situation like that. There's no, I usually go to grants or some other programs, but there's no programs that will buy alarm systems. There's no states don't use, towns don't use. So again, it sounded like something that someone lobbed out there that they didn't really research because no one uses those things. People use the Weather Service Prediction Center, which will tell me that the river might flood in 3 days. So I have 3 days to prepare. It's not a little bell that goes off at 2 o'clock because the river does flood. Our process is that we should already be there because we already know the river's flood. And the state pays $450,000 a year for those river gauges that predicts that the National Water Service uses to predict how.
So
As opposed to-
so you wouldn't say to a town, so you don't have an alert system for surface water now or levels now. So.
It's not really a thing that's used out.
So how do you know, like, so when the flooding was happening and I got tons of alerts that said the water level is blah, blah, blah. Like, who was that from? Like when the dam was like, you know.
I have to see the alerts. Most
So
alerts.
we get,
most alerts-
I think ours must be from the dam people then. It's not from,
There's a potential, yeah, because there is privately owned dams, there's state-owned dams. All of them have individual, and this is a whole other council that's working across the hall. I think they're talking about if a dam might fail, if a dam is getting to certain levels. Certain dams, like I think Green River Dam, they use Blackboard, I think, which is a notification system. They know all the people downstream, so they can send them messages if it gets too high.
okay, so that's who we got information
It
from
depends on the
before?
dam.
So it sounds
part of the
like
problem.
it's a confusing topic that I would not want a municipality to have to navigate on their own. I'd love for them to get some assistance with it and access to the development of them.
But that doesn't appear to be Eric.
the National Weather Service probably is.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused, like how it just doesn't seem,
I've never actually seen a system that is on the river that will alert you when it gets to a certain level. I've only seen the forecasting systems, which is the systems they'll tell you what the level is at a given time, but it won't quote unquote alert you.
Interesting.
So this is.
And those are all general, like every town can go to the National Weather Service, Burlington gauge. It lists the whole state. There's a nice picture of every gauge. You click on the gauge, it'll tell you where it currently is. It'll tell you where it think it's going. It'll tell you when it think it's going to crest. And that's when you go into the emergency operations center, that's my big screen. I'm looking at that directly. So every town has access to that. And every
right,
town has.
so I think that's probably what they're trying to describe.
And that goes back to my original thing is that everything was thrown in this pile and not researched.
Okay, so.
So
what
not
would be-
only is, and
So instead of getting rid of the great work that our House Government Operations Committee did, because it seems like they spent a considerable amount of time on this, and we don't want to relitigate it. Is there another word that you have suggested in your written testimony for changes here, or you're just saying you want section 7 and 8 gone?
Your first thing I said in Seneca House, and you gave the same testimony and gave the same written testimony. So I feel like this, a little bit, it was thrown out there.
Oh.
And then it's just been moved. Like I testified in appropriations, I testified in finance, and everyone was like, maybe next, maybe. And now I'm with
so-
you. So they did do some research. They did get some people in to testify. They did do their work. But I go back to my originals, it feels a little bit like it was just all compiled, which is great. A great first step. It's the exact first step that we do. Should be done, should always be done. But there's a step 2 and 3 and 4. And then step 5 is, okay, this is the root cause of why this individual or this town or this state is looking for these flood, because they didn't know about the National Weather Service. They didn't know about the hydraulic service that we get out of Massachusetts. They didn't know about the fact that BT Alert can send you immediately every National Weather Service alert that goes out. Not just flooding, but I've gotten actually 4 while I've been sitting in this room about a weather system pulling in. So all of that is already available, already free. It boils a little bit back down to the towns just don't have the capacity to understand it. Now that we've also worked on training, and I talk a little bit about that in that testimony, because every town can get emergency management director training by statute.
Goes back to one of your early points, which is the EMs need to be required to be trained.
Senator Yoski.
So I hear you that this boils down to a municipal capacity issue, but if we have a municipal capacity issue, they're not going to have the capacity to go get all of this information. So if not VEM, who is the right place for them to get it?
So information like the flooding is available through National Weather Service, and that's in our training for EMDs. So literally it's a website that they can go to. We train them on this BT Alert, so we can show them how to get weather alerts. BT Alert has 2 systems, right? The municipality has their ability to push messaging about dangerous things or push messaging about road closures, but also as a civilian, you can sign up for BT Alert and get stuff.
Yeah, okay, they're great.
Yeah, we
I
are.
agree.
We also in that
Okay, well, we'll help you with that later. That's
We have the
we need some
ability
BEM help with this particular.
we have the ability to push messaging to individuals. You have the right to ask for specific messaging. We have the right as a state to say, look, this is life, death, the standard's going to below. We're going to reach out to you. So we do have a capacity already. So that's what we're talking about with, there's already a system out there. So when we talk about developing.
Like, right, it'll be easy to do.
Right,
Like,
but I guess
don't
we're-
know.
And that's,
Feel like we're circling around. There's a system out there, but the towns don't know it exists and they don't have the capacity to know where it exists. And so for me, that's where the state comes in to help build that capacity with the efficiencies of scale at the state level.
and we don't have the capacity yet. I guess I'll answer it that way. It was great. Last year, the legislators gave us 3 additional regional coordinators. So now we have 6. So they have
We
about,
need more.
I can't say that. So there's about
You don't not need more?
60 to 75%, but actually, as we speak, at my, my orders or my, Bennett's, perspective of what I want from the regional coordinator staff, they go out to every town and they're working with the local emergency management plan, helping them develop it. Those local emergency management plans talk about what you would do during an emergency. It has different sections about shelters. We added some language last year. Some of this language in section 2, parking plans are more realistic in the local emergency management plan as opposed to the state emergency management plan. I made those comments as well. But we're going in and our regional coordinators are talking to them about this, and they talk to them about what BT Alert is and what you can do with the National Weather Service. And this is with all the resources available. So we've been pushing that. So a little bit of what you said is we're already doing it.
Yeah.
So I get it. But we're doing it in a different way. We're doing it through the local.
You want it to be less prescriptive.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
So I hear you that you want it to be less prescriptive in section 2. And I also hear you saying section 8 works for you because that's the work that has to be done first.
Section 8
Is that right?
is the assessment.
Mhm.
But if you put the assessment 6 months after you put everything into statute, then I have to do it regardless of what the assessment says.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get to is what do you want? You want, it sounds like you want.
I'd like to
section-
push the whole thing past the assessment. So if the
Right,
assessment.
exactly, that's what I'm hearing.
So really effective date.
Let me just finish
No.
though.
Well, just,
Let me finish my
I don't know. if there's an
thought,
effect.
which is, my understanding is that you want the assessment to take place first. And then, after we do the assessment, we can figure out what it is we want and then write the statute.
Yeah, and I think part of the assessment, maybe the language could be, I guess, updated a little bit to say, if we already do these things, do you want us to say that we already do them? Now we're done with it, and I'm fine with creating a checklist of things that we've already done. But just maybe outlining the resources that could be needed to get more education. We already have a modular weather system, but towns need to be resourced. And so my assessment would lean towards resources to assist the towns in getting that help that they need. So yeah, so I would try to put the horse back in front of the car.
I think that's what I'm hearing you say, and I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense for us to write statute about stuff we haven't assessed and decided what we actually need or what's available, what we do, what we don't do. Duplicative effort drives me nuts. So it does strike me that we should do the assessment before we do make a lot of prescriptive laws that maybe would be reversed after we did the assessment.
I mean, that would be great. And I know the time's running out, so I just want to.
But you know what? You're our expert on emergency. You are the director of Vermont Emergency Management.
I'll take that.
Please tell Stephanie I woke up to hearing her this morning on Vermont Public. She was great. I just think we have to listen to you more fully, and I am not clear why all those other committees didn't listen more fully initially.
well,
So,
just one final point, because I'm in favor of the language as it's written. I actually think that one of the points you're making around a needs assessment, while I support that there is a process, my husband's a dispatcher, there's a whole order of operations. I understand that. That is a different philosophy than like democracy. A little bit of the work that you're seeing in here is a community needs assessment that we heard from constituents. Like a lot of the ideas that go into legislation are because we heard from people who said, this didn't happen, or this did happen, and this is what could make it better. And so I think a lot of this you will find in a needs assessment process are exactly what we heard from constituents. I think that that's kind of an organic process for which we post disaster, learn new information. And so I think that it's actually delaying the process of getting some things that we have identified that we need to move forward. And I think they would be identified in your assessment. So I actually think we should keep the dates exactly as they are.
And I think part of my comment to that is we've done after act, we've done 8 after actions in the last 2 years, and these haven't come up. So
Okay.
what I'm saying is that we want to make sure that these come up through the normal review channels, because there is a process for creating an improvement. This is broken, it needs to be fixed. You have to figure out why, when, where, what, and how. And I feel like we've only done the one.
Yeah, and
We've only figured out the one. So if you go from someone said it at a town meeting to put it in statute, my reaction is that we've jumped a lot of steps, right? We're not really getting to the root cause of why that person at that town meeting said it. We're not, if more than one person say it, like, they don't know what they don't know, right? They're gonna say, we need a weather prediction service, we need to be able to know everything all the time, and that's already out there. But they just don't know it. So the root cause isn't that we need a weather prediction system or we need a communication system, which is what this says.
Senator
We
Bjork,
don't need them. We already have.
So I think what I'm struggling with, and I sort of go back to the people that aren't at the table, like if these things are coming to us, but not to you, there's a disconnect between there is a problem, but you're not hearing about it. And I think we have to work to address that. If we have municipalities saying this is a problem and that has not been part of the sort of after event review for you, I think we do need to do something as a legislature to figure out why is there a disconnect between the good work that you're doing and our towns that are not getting what they need.
Oh, well said. I don't know how we should do that, but I want to do that.
Yeah, well, and my guess is that aspects of this bill are trying to do
Yes,
that.
I think
And
that's
maybe
exact.
it needs to be massaged some, but I think that that is what we're trying to do, is make sure that the people currently who are not getting their needs met are put on the radar to get their needs met. And
I think we agree on that. We want to make sure that everyone that needs something gets what they need. So we're not advocating for not doing things that are necessary. We're advocating to make sure that are they really necessary? You know, making sure that, you know, I've done a lot of after actions for exercises, and people will put in something, and once you dig down, we call it the 6th grade toddler. Why? You got 6 times why. And when you get to the last one, well, that's not actually this. Now you're over here. It's something completely different. So that's what we want to make sure that kind of system is followed. So it's not that we're trying to jettison any work or trying to say that's not a problem, it's not going to be fixed. Maybe we do need emergency parking plans.
I think you do.
Okay.
I do want to, one last quick thing. In section 3 was the buyout program. I do want to clarify. It was mentioned that the buyout program is tied to the pilot program, to the pilot funding, and that I don't believe is true.
Yeah, sorry.
The funding for
Go ahead, Samantha.
the funding for the buyout program, there is no fund for the buyout program. It's a program without a funding source. So one, I feel like it's duplicative. That may be because when the language was originally put in, it had language that said the buyouts could be green space, or they could be rebuilt with buildings that were flood resistant. Representative said, and went kind of dug into that flood resistant, and it was a bit of a Pandora's box. So they pulled the language out. And when you pull that language out, it basically says it has to be green space. So now your buyout program is the same as a community resilience and disaster mitigation fund, which this committee created last year. It was mentioned that part of the rationale was to put it in statute. The CRDM is in statute. It was last year. Now there is another fund, Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which we also use, which is not in statute.
Okay, I'm seeing our council
It's a program.
may be able to help us with this.
Yes, the buyout is a program, not a fund. So the money, to my knowledge, no money from the pilot fund goes into the buyout. It goes into the stabilization, the Grand List Stabilization Program, which is a different program.
Yes.
So there's 2 different programs. So the buyout program, our indication is that it's duplicative of the CRDM, the one that you created last year. It specifically says buyout, whereas CRDM says all hazard mitigation things. This gets a little bit back into, we can do a lot more with it.
Okay, let me ask Tucker if he can help.
Sure. To clarify, this is standing up a specific mandate to operate a buyout program that does not exist in current law. It could be funded by the CRDM fund, might not be. It is just mandating that a buyout program be stood up and carried forward.
Without any funding.
To the best of my knowledge, the CRDM doesn't have a funding source. It was given $3 million last year, a one-time deal for elevation work. It has all been obligated for elevation projects. And now that sits empty, as well as the FRCM is an unfunded program. It was given money, but now it is empty because we pushed it all out. So those 2 programs specifically are to pick up either the match for a buyout, because FEMA will only cover 75%, and you don't want a homeowner to lose 25%. So both those programs are allowed to cover that, but more holistically, they're actually built to pick up what falls through FEMA's cracks.
Right.
FEMA has a buyout program all of its own. It'll buy out your house, and we mandate it, and we want to cover the 25%. But there are things that they won't buy out if you're in the flood plain, but not the floodway. If you have, and it allows us a lot more. So we're not seeing the difference between the new program and the old program.
So we now have 2 unfunded funds.
Yeah, Tucker.
The critical difference is that it's in statute and mandates that this program carry forward. So you're taking the discretion to operate this program away and telling the Division of Emergency Management that they will have a buyout program moving forward,
The CRDM is in statute.
but does not specify anywhere in that section. I just pulled it up that you have to operate a buyout program.
So that we totally agree with. The word buyout, again, to specificity. There is no specificity. It says mitigation projects. That has holistically been elevation, it's been floodplain restoration, it's been buyouts. So it gives us the opportunity. So to Tucker's point, this new one specifically said by very closely ties your hands to what can be done to it, so. Not exactly duplicative, so
Okay, I may be the only one, but this feels more like a pool of oatmeal and I'm trying to thread it. And I'm having a lot of difficulty doing that. So I want to just call a halt today to this.
Thank you very much for your time.
We'll definitely take this up again next week and definitely have you come back, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Josh and Samantha as well.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right,
you. It's a
one
pleasure.
last and hopefully very quick item is the charter. Tucker?
Yay.
Oh, good. It's 2
Thank you
pages.
so much.
It seems very
Aaron,
short. I'm not gonna use the other S word.
No. And I think you're Jillian credit, but because she's the one that figured this out just by looking at the bill.
lost grand list.
So Tucker, welcome.
Good afternoon, Senate Government Operations. For the record, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. You should have in front of you H17 as passed the House, which adopts the charter of the town of Morristown. Many of the sections that you will see starting with sections 1 and 2 are things that you're familiar with, somewhat boilerplate language that the General Assembly has attempted to eliminate in the past by adopting a general law that states both of these things, but still shows up in new charters and charter amendments all the time. And that's first, that the town retains its corporate existence, even though this charter is going into place. Second, that the general law governing municipalities still available to the town despite the fact that it's adopting this charter. And finally, the operative section of the charter governs the town manager and grants the town manager some authority that does not exist in general law for town managers broadly. Section 3 states that the town manager will be the chief executive officer and head of the administrative branch of town government and will be responsible to the select board for the efficient administration of municipal affairs. That's all standard. It exists in general law, general statements of the duties and responsibility here broadly. Subsection B is where we get to some of the unique powers. The town manager shall have the authority to hire, appoint, that is unique, discipline, and remove all town employees, subject to the provisions of personnel rules approved by the select board. The town manager may authorize the department head to hire, appoint, discipline, or remove an employee subject to the manager's discretion and supervision. That is not unique in charter law and is somewhat standard for the administration of municipal government broadly. It's that first sentence, especially the appointment power, that is unique. And the only other municipality that has a town manager with this power is the town of Waterbury. And that is because last biennium, the town of Waterbury adopted a charter with this exact same language for the purpose of giving their town manager this authority.
And I assume if the town of Waterbury has done it, it is legal and constitutional and not giving away powers that are beholden to the.
Correct. And
No.
there are no, outside of justices of the peace, there are no municipal officers in the Constitution of Vermont. So yes, this is exception.
So my question was, what does line 10 have to do with the town of Morristown?
I may be working.
Versus town.
The manager's discretion and supervision
No,
on page 1.
23 appendix,
Yes.
town of Northfield.
Well, Title 24 appendix is starting to get a little crowded. And as things have become crowded, we've been faced with the possibility that it could get out of alphabetical order. So to dodge that horrific outcome, we redesignated the town of Northfield order so that we could keep alphabetical.
So that's what I thought this was all about, was because they were moving Morristown head of Northfield alphabetically, they had to redo the charter, but that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Okay. So Morristown does not currently have a charter?
This is their first.
Ah, okay, now I'm getting it.
They are adopting a charter.
But we are going to ensure that things remain in alphabetical order.
That's correct.
I couldn't vote.
There is one charter out of alphabetical order and I failed to get it into the technical
Can we
curriculum.
please fix it?
So
We could amend,
We can amend it. We already have one amendment.
we'll.
Ben will never forgive me.
No, can we please fix it? That.
No, it means it's the first thing for next year's technical.
Yeah.
No.
Senator Clarkson.
So Morrisville is a hamlet of Morristown.
That sounds right, but I honestly can't recall at this specific moment.
Okay, it's not a town though of its own, as I recall. It is a hamlet of Morristown.
I think it's a village, but
I was gonna say, I think this may be like a junction.
I believe.
So are they one of our, like Woodstock, they have a village and a town?
It's Morrisville, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a different name.
No, that's, I just am curious about that, because remember Chat was from. Yeah, it's Morrisville, Morristown, I think.
It would be
Okay.
like,
Yeah, it's a village within the town.
Tucker, might I ask, what is the town that is out of alphabetical order?
I'll have to pull it up. It's in the W's.
Hmm.
Uh,
Williamstown.
Yeah, well, it looks like Morrisville, if anyone's interested.
I am interested, I
It
asked.
looks like Morrisville is the village within Morristown, and it doesn't look like they have a charter.
It's where the light plant is in the hospital, right?
Yes.
And they don't have a charter.
They do not have a charter.
Okay.
So
Morrisville,
Have they considered seceding from the rest of Morristown?
don't get started at Essex Junction.
I am Essex Town.
Oh.
if they are overseen, they would still, Tucker being overseen by this charter.
Mhm.
Sure they would, unless they were.
They're still part of the
incorporated as a
town. Well,
Like
that's,
White River Junction.
I would, you're right. It would depend on whether or not they are an independent municipal corporation, specifically an incorporated village. If they are an incorporated village, they would still be subject to the rules, ordinances of the town, not necessarily subject to the town manager's control because they would be a separate municipal corporation. But if any other provisions were added to this charter in the future that did not conflict with the village's government or any duly adopted bylaws, ordinances, or rules, then it would govern the residents of the village as well, because they are also town residents.
Morrisville is incorporated into the larger town of Morristown.
When
There-
Winooski split from Colchester, did they change their name or were they always Winooski even when they were within Colchester?
That's a great question about when Winooski separated and became a city. And somewhere I have copies of the General Assembly's approval.
Okay, so this does two things. It re-alphabetizes Northfield and Morristown. And it also creates for the first time the charter for the municipality of Morristown, correct? Okay.
And it gives their town manager,
Yeah, he's good. Or she has a lot of power there,
yeah,
but they were.
Joining Waterbury wielding lots of power.
They could write EOs.
Well, they can hire, appoint, discipline, and remove all town employees.
Under the rules of the select board.
No, they could just do it.
No, they're the town manager.
This is what is their charter.
Yeah.
It's no.
So, David Yakabone and Sadia Lamont were the two sponsors of this. I'm just out of courtesy, probably gonna have them visit next week and see how this came about, what the vote was, if there was any controversy, that kind of thing.
Would probably be good also to hear from someone from the municipal government of Morristown
Yes, the town manager.
or the town.
I don't know if they have them yet.
I think
Like
they
board chair.
probably have somebody.
They probably have,
Someone.
they have a legislative body of some
Yes,
sort.
or they could send us chair of the select board too.
Okay, so did you get those names?
Yeah.
Oh, you can just look it up.
I invited the reps, but they're still on the
It's the
floor.
one.
Yeah, we can take it up next week.
The town that is out of order is the town of West Rutland, which has a chapter designated in Title 24 appendix, but there is no statutory language for the town in here. So it doesn't show up in our database or on the legislative website, which is why it was missed when the W's were reorganized when Waterbury charter was adopted. Because you would have had to actually find chapter 155E in the Vermont statutes annotated green books. Because there's nothing there. It's just the chapter heading. Great question.
West Rutland, one of your babies.
Yes.
Cross it out.
I didn't even know it was a separate there.
Oh, yeah.
The name
Oh, yeah.
on West Rutland.
Related.
There's three, Proctor, West Rutland, and then Rutland City, which was, those were the three original. It was all one at one time.
And then.
Thank you.
The marble.
Now I
company
can have
created
anxiety at night
divisions,
about
and
the
one of the
inaccurate
brothers said, I'm gonna
elimination
take
of
that
West
thing there and I'm
Rutland.
gonna call it Proctor.
That is what I asked.
Somebody else said, I'm gonna call mine West Rutland.
But it can be fixed.
So they're all
Yes,
friends.
I would like to fix it.
No, no, no,
They're
no,
all
they
separate.
were.
Exactly
Wait.
necessary.
Just, okay, so we'll have the two House members come in. Is there, and maybe somebody from the legislative body of Morristown, whatever that happens to be. And we'll take this up again next week.
Tucker, do you have to be elsewhere?
I do. I have to go do 397 in finance, which is curious.
So.
Oh, that's fine. I was hoping to talk to you about 131.
I will circle back when I'm done.
Yeah, so next week, Tuesday, we're gonna consider the amendment.
Yep.
And then Wednesday vote it out.
We sent you the request for the elections.
I got it.
Okay.
Anything else for the committee today?
No, but there's a VA benefits, there's a veterans public hearing that you mentioned at one point
Yeah,
that we.
I've agreed to do that with the House.
On
Is that
April 30th. It
Yes,
was
it
in,
is.
it was in the calendar today.
Okay, so that's next week. No, that's a week from,
That's
at
many
least
weeks
2
from
weeks.
now.
okay,
Toward the end of the month.
okay, so we don't need to do anything in advance of.
No, and if something comes up and you can't be there, right? Because it's like 4 to 5:30 right now.
Okay,
So.